You get the promotion you've been working toward for years. Your boss shakes your hand, your team sends congratulations, and for about 4 seconds, it actually feels good. Then the first real thought arrives. Quiet, but absolute. They're going to figure out, I don't actually know what I'm doing. Or maybe it's smaller than a promotion. You finish a project everyone praises. You ace an exam you were sure you'd fail. Someone calls you talented, and instead of accepting it, some part of you immediately starts building a case for why they're wrong. It was luck. It was timing. It was because nobody looked closely enough. Maybe it shows up somewhere quieter, like a group chat where everyone's discussing something in your own field and you go silent, terrified that the next question will be the one that finally reveals you don't actually belong in the conversation. You've read the books. You've done the work. And somehow, none of it ever quite counts as proof. If any of that sounds familiar, you already live inside a courtroom that only you can see. And in that courtroom, you are the accused, the prosecutor, and the judge, running the same trial over and over, gathering evidence against your own competence, no matter how much proof of the opposite keeps piling up outside the door. Most people call this impostor syndrome and leave it there, as if naming it explains it. But naming it isn't the same as understanding why an intelligent, capable brain would spend its energy prosecuting itself. Today we're going to break down the real psychology behind people who feel like frauds, no matter how much they actually achieve, and how to finally close that case for good. Welcome back to Vaulten. Let's get started. In 1978, psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes gave this pattern its first real name, the impostor phenomenon. Studying high-achieving women, they noticed something strange. These weren't people with weak resumes secretly worried about being caught. These were genuinely excellent students, professionals, and researchers who privately believed with complete conviction that their success was an accident waiting to be discovered. The mechanism at the center of it is what psychologists call an external attribution bias for success, paired with an internal attribution bias for failure. In plain language, that means when something goes right, your brain automatically hands the credit to something outside of you. Luck, timing, other people covering for your gaps. But when something goes wrong, your brain does the opposite. It doesn't blame the deadline or the bad information you were given or an honest mistake anyone could have made. It blames you, the real you, the one everyone else apparently hasn't met yet. This creates a genuinely brutal trap because it means success can never actually accumulate as evidence. Every win gets filed under exceptions. Every failure gets filed under proof. The courtroom never runs out of new evidence to consider because the trial was rigged from the very first case. Later research expanded on Clance and Imes's original work and found this same courtroom shows up well beyond the group they first studied, across genders, across industries, in students and CEOs and surgeons and first-year employees alike. It isn't a rare glitch, it's closer to a default setting for a certain kind of mind. One that learned somewhere along the way that competence has to be defended rather than simply lived in. Think of it like a smoke detector that only ever triggers on smoke and treats a clear room as suspicious rather than as good news. A healthy brain sees a clear room and thinks, everything's fine, I can relax. A brain running on imposter logic sees a clear room and thinks, it's clear right now, but that just means I haven't set anything off yet. Nothing you achieve ever gets to mean the room is actually safe. It only ever means the danger hasn't been discovered. It's worth pointing out how different this is from what people sometimes call the Dunning-Kruger effect, the pattern where genuinely unskilled people tend to overestimate their own ability because they don't yet know enough to see their own gaps. Imposter syndrome is almost the exact mirror image of that. The people running this particular courtroom are usually the ones who understand a field well enough to see every single gap in their own knowledge in vivid detail and mistake that clear-eyed awareness for proof they don't belong, instead of what it actually is, a sign of real expertise. Ironically, the people who should feel the least like frauds are often the ones who feel it the most. So where does a mind learn to build a courtroom like this against itself? For a lot of people, the wiring starts early, often with praise, which sounds strange until you look more closely at what kind of praise. Psychologist Carol Dweck spent years studying how children respond to different kinds of feedback. She found something counterintuitive. Kids who were consistently praised for being smart, gifted, or natural actually became more fragile over time, not less. Because if being smart is the whole identity, then every difficult problem becomes a threat to that identity instead of a normal part of learning. If you got an A because you're naturally brilliant, then getting a B doesn't just mean you struggled with one assignment. It means the brilliant kid was never really real. Maybe you were that kid. Maybe you learned early that your worth in the room was tied to being the one who already knew the answer, not the one still figuring it out. Maybe you remember the exact feeling of your hand going up in class only when you were completely certain, never to test an idea out loud because being wrong in front of people felt less like a normal part of learning and more like a small public trial of your entire identity. Maybe a report card with one B on it produced a heavier silence at the dinner table than the 4 A's next to it ever produced praise. Struggle, in your house or your classroom, wasn't treated as normal. It was treated as evidence that the label might have been wrong all along. So you built a very specific kind of intelligence, not just the ability to get things right, but the ability to preemptively defend yourself against ever being caught getting something wrong. That defense mechanism doesn't retire when you grow up. It just moves into your career, your relationships, every room where you might be evaluated. And the cost of running it for years isn't abstract. It shows up as burnout that doesn't match your actual workload, because half your energy is going toward defense, not the work itself. It shows up as opportunities quietly turned down before anyone even offered them, because applying at all felt like walking straight into cross-examination. And it shows up as a strange kind of loneliness, standing in a room full of people who respect you while a part of you quietly waits for all of them to see what you supposedly already know finally. And it comes with 3 familiar habits. Sign 1, discounting the evidence. Every compliment gets a silent rebuttal. They only picked me because nobody else applied. The client was just being polite. I got lucky that the interviewer happened to ask the one question I actually knew the answer to. Even a direct, specific compliment gets quietly rewritten in your head into something smaller and safer to accept. This isn't modesty. Modesty accepts the compliment and moves on. This is active cross-examination, treating every piece of good evidence as suspicious until it can be explained away. Sign 2, overworking as a defense strategy. If you secretly believe you're one mistake away from being exposed, the only logical response is to make sure that mistake never happens. So you check the email 5 times before sending it. You prepare 3 times more than anyone else in the meeting, rehearsing answers to questions nobody is likely to ask. You say yes to more than you can actually carry, because turning something down feels like handing the prosecution a piece of evidence. The exhausting part isn't the work itself, it's that no amount of preparation ever actually closes the case, because the fear was never really about the work. It was about being fundamentally not enough underneath it. Sign 3, an allergic reaction to being seen. Getting praised in front of other people doesn't feel good. It feels exposing, like a spotlight pointed directly at the gap between how competent you look and how uncertain you actually feel inside. Someone introduces you as an expert at a dinner party, and your stomach drops instead of your chest lifting. So you deflect. You change the subject. You give the credit away before anyone can examine it too closely. And sometimes in the most self-defeating version of this, you quietly hold yourself back from opportunities altogether, because it's safer to never be tested than to risk the verdict. Here's something worth noticing about your own case specifically. This courtroom rarely runs at full volume in every part of your life at once. You might feel completely solid as a friend, a parent, a cook, someone who can fix a leaking faucet, and still feel like a total fraud the second you walk into a boardroom or open a blank document you're supposed to fill with something brilliant. That's not a contradiction. It's a clue. The trial only runs in the rooms where your worth once got tied to performance in the first place. Everywhere else, you were just allowed to be a person, so nobody built a courtroom there. So how do you actually get out of a courtroom you built yourself, brick by brick, over years? The goal isn't to convince yourself you're the smartest person in every room. That was never really the point, and chasing that feeling is exactly what kept the trial running in the first place. The real goal is to stop treating your own competence as something that has to be proven beyond reasonable doubt every single day. Here's why simply telling yourself, "I earned this," rarely works on its own. The courtroom was never really a logic problem. If it were, a list of your actual accomplishments would have shut the whole thing down years ago. This runs deeper than reasoning, closer to identity, which is why it takes more than a single pep talk in the mirror to dismantle. It takes new evidence repeated often enough in a format the prosecuting side of your brain can't just wave away. Step 1. Separate competence from confidence. This might be the single most important distinction in this entire video. Feeling uncertain is not evidence of being unskilled. Plenty of genuinely excellent people feel shaky before a big presentation. Plenty of mediocre people walk in with total, unearned confidence, and confidence has never once been a reliable measure of who actually knows what they're doing. Your feelings are not a courtroom verdict. They're just weather passing through, and weather is not evidence of anything except that it's currently raining. Step 2. Start keeping an actual evidence file. In writing, not just in your head. Every time something goes well, write down what you specifically did to make it happen, not just the outcome. Your brain's discounting bias is powerful, but it's not immune to a written record it can't argue with later. Read that file back on the days the courtroom voice gets loud. If a client thanks you for solving something, write down the actual decision you made, not just client was happy. If a project goes well, write down the specific judgment call that made the difference. You're not trying to convince yourself you're perfect. You're just refusing to let the prosecution work with a one-sided file anymore. Step 3. Redefine what expertise actually means. Real expertise was never about knowing everything in advance and never being wrong. It's about knowing how to find the answer, how to recover from a mistake, how to keep going when you don't immediately know what to do. The senior doctor still looks things up. The veteran engineer still says, "Let me check instead of guessing." Every person you admire, every expert you've ever looked up to, has stood in a room not knowing something. The difference between them and the version of you that feels like a fraud isn't that they know more. It's that they stopped treating not knowing as proof they don't belong there. When you start practicing this, the courtroom doesn't just get a better verdict, it slowly stops running at all. You stop needing a defense because you're no longer on trial. The version of you that used to cross-examine every compliment starts letting them land instead. Not because you've become arrogant, but because you've finally stopped confusing self-doubt with self-knowledge. You were never a fraud. A fraud doesn't lie awake worrying about being one. A fraud doesn't put in the work, ask the hard questions, or care this much about doing it right. The fact that you're afraid of being caught not knowing something is actually proof of the opposite of what you think it proves. It means you take the thing seriously enough to be honest with yourself about its edges. That was never weakness. It was always just honesty, aimed in the wrong direction, at yourself instead of at the work. Somewhere along the way, you learned that being good at something meant never being allowed to be uncertain about it again. Nobody sat you down and taught you that lesson directly. You built it out of report cards and offhand comments and moments where struggle got treated like a red flag instead of a normal Tuesday. But a lesson you built yourself is also a lesson you're allowed to unbuild, one piece of ignored evidence at a time. Picture that courtroom one more time, but picture it empty now. No prosecutor cross-examining your last compliment, no judge waiting to catch you out. Just you and the work and the quiet, unremarkable fact that you've been doing it well for longer than you've been willing to admit. So out of the 3 signs today, which one is running the loudest trial in your head right now? The discounting, the overworking, or the fear of being seen? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if you know someone brilliant who still doesn't believe it about themselves, send them this video. Sometimes the only thing standing between someone and believing their own evidence is somebody else pointing it out first. I'm Vaulten. Don't forget to subscribe so we can keep exploring the hidden corners of the mind together. See you next time.